Welcome to the Finance and Investment Committee meeting of Vallecitos Water District on Monday, February 22nd, 2020 at 4 p.m. I'm going to read our COVID-19 notice to the public. Due to the evolving situation with the COVID-19 novel coronavirus and Executive Order N3520, so long as state and local public officials have imposed or recommended social distancing measures, Vallecitos will not hold future meetings via teleconference, or will hold future meetings via teleconferencing and allow members of the public to observe and address the meeting telephonically or otherwise electronically. During this period of time, Vallecitos Water District will not be making any physical location available for members of the public to observe the meeting and offer public comment. The public is encouraged to watch and participate in the meeting from the safety of their homes. The meeting can be viewed on the agenda page located on the main page of the district's website. Public comments or questions can be submitted to the following email address, publiccomment@vwd.org. All written comments that are received 90 minutes before the meeting will be provided to the board, and a record of the receipt of comment will be noted during the meeting. Okay, great. And of course, as with all of our meetings, if anybody's out there watching in and would like to comment or ask a question, just simply raise your hand and we'll do everything we can to recognize you as quickly as we can. And with that, we don't typically do a roll call for the committee meeting, so I'll go ahead and just call us to order, and I'll turn it over to you, Glenn, to kick us off.
All right, so we have 3 items on the agenda today, and we'll try to, I know we have some limited time, so we'll try to go through them as expeditiously as possible. I'm going to ask Diane, I know public comment is listed last. I don't think I got any comments that the public submitted before the meeting, but if I'm wrong, I'll ask Diane to correct me there. Diane, do you know if
you're
we got
good?
any?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, thank you. And Miss Martin is online with us, so if she sent something in and we didn't catch it, she can correct us there. So with that, I'm going to turn over item number 1 to Wes, and this is our budget to actual results over the last 5 years. We do this every year as we prepare the budget to demonstrate to the board how well we're doing our budgeting. So Wes, why don't you take it away? And I'll stop sharing my screen so you can take it. There you go.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Good afternoon. I am excited to kick off the fiscal year 2022 budget season. And this is the budget party page updated for 2022. I put a lot of work into this. I had to change the 21 to a 22. And as usual, we'll be taking you down the corners of Budget Street and Savings Avenue. So let's get it started. As always, yeah, we typically start off by having departments submit their requests for materials and services, and that'll be happening at the next meeting. But before we do that, we like to take a look at what's happened so far historically. So we'll take a look at the operating expenses to see how we've done budget to actual over the last 5 years. And I've even thrown in a bonus year, so now we have 6. So we'll be doing budget to actual for the last 6 years. And then after that, we'll go over the preliminary budget calendar. This is just to give you an idea of what the process will be. Hopefully take a look at our schedule, see if we can get some tentative dates for upcoming finance committee meetings, and just go over the whole thing as far as the plan. And finally, at the end, we're just going to have a discussion on the capacity fund. I know the question was brought up at the last board meeting, so we just want to have a short discussion about that and get some feedback from the directors at the committee meeting.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt you, Wes. And I do appreciate the festive budget slide. It does. It's exciting, and I appreciate that you put work into it. Maybe not this year, but a couple of years back. It's a colorful slide. The request to agendize the capacity fees. It is unfortunate that there was a miscommunication about the timing of this meeting, and that I'm not able to stay on for the duration of this meeting. So the request to agendize the capacity fees, I think that should be also, if we don't get through it to my satisfaction, it should be agendized for a public meeting as well, so that we can have a robust discussion about it. So I just want to make that clear that, I may be requesting that it be put back on, our regular public meeting as well.
Yeah, President Sinella, if I can address that. So the intent is that we will be putting the capacity fund on the March 3rd full board agenda for discussion. The reason it's on this meeting today is to get some thoughts from the committee members as to how you would like us to address the item on March 3rd. It wasn't intended to be a comprehensive overview of the cap fund. It was simply to say, would you like us to give a full presentation or just put it on the agenda to allow the conversation? That's really the level of input that we want today, but rest assured it will be on the March 3rd full board meeting for a full discussion.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
So this is the chart that shows the budget to actual for water operating expenses for the last 6 years. As you can see, over the last 5 years, we've been pretty accurate with our budgeting process. We're usually within, less than 5% variance, except for last year in fiscal year 2019, when we were about 7% over budget. This happened because we had about $640,000 in main breaks, and we just didn't foresee that, so it put us over budget. But this year we're back to being under budget by 1.21% or $146,000. So we budgeted $12.1 million in operating expenses for water, and we came in at about almost $12 million for the actual for 2020. So let's take a look at some more detail on the budget to actual for water operating expenses. So this slide shows the detail, and you can see down bottom, one too fast, the $146,000 variance of budget to actual and the 1.21% that we're under budget. And the major reasons for this are that pumping was under budget by $113,000. Pumping was under budget mainly as a result of we had several painting and paving and sealing projects that we had budgeted for this year that we didn't get to. So that's why pumping's under budget. Power costs were right in line because that's the majority of the pumping costs. But those paving and painting jobs didn't get completed in fiscal year 2020. Tanks and reservoirs is similar. It's under budget by $125,000. And the same thing, we had several paving and resealing jobs that we wanted to get done. Some were at the Palomar tank, the Mount Bell tank, and the North Twin Oaks. And none of those got completed during fiscal year 2020. So we ended up being under budget about $125,000. Transmission and distribution was under budget by $164,000. And this is pretty much as a result of what I was talking about as far as the main breaks. You can see last year we had, we were over budget by $745,000 because of the main breaks that we had in the previous year. So we try to account for those. We try to plan for them in the upcoming budget years. So we ended up increasing the transmission distribution budget for fiscal year 2020, and we didn't have the amount of main breaks that we had planned for. So then we ended up under budget this year. And finally, general and administrative expenses were over budget by $429,000. That's a result of just more vacation time and sick time in fiscal year 2020, and less time actually posted to projects, which resulted in less overhead to G&A, to general and administrative. So overall, water operating expenses are 1.2% under budget. So I think we should take a minute to kind of celebrate that because it's a pretty good accomplishment, I think, in coming within 2% of budget. Good job by staff. Ed's crew really does a great job putting all those details together, and it was a good year for water.
Good job.
So next we'll move on to sewer. So sewer budget to actual over the last 6 years, you can see typically we're closer to about a 10% variance on sewer, but this year we had we did well and we were within 4%. We actually were under budget by 3.83% for fiscal year 2020. We budgeted $7.1 million and we came in at about 6.9 for a variance of $274,433. So again, looking at the detail for sewer, this shows the total variance. Here's the 274,000 and the 3.83% below budget. And that's made up mainly of a variance of 224,000 below budget for collection and conveyance. That resulted from about $75,000 savings in chemical costs. We had $45,000 in manhole rehabilitation that we performed that actually we were able to capitalize instead of expense. So it just became a capital asset and didn't hit the operating budget. We had planned for about $50,000 in emergency repairs that we thought may need to be done, but they didn't end up having those costs incurred. There was some Vector maintenance that we had budgeted for and some CCTV rehabs that weren't completed during the fiscal year either. So that resulted in the $224,000. The next biggest variance would be the IT budget being under budget by $89,145. And that's really just a result of outside services, about $56,000 that weren't done during the fiscal year. And then we have the general and administrative variance of $300,000 over budget, again, as a result of sick and vacation time being higher this year than last year and less overhead or time being posted to projects during the fiscal year. One thing worth noting for sewer, especially for Director Boyd Hodgson, new directors, this excludes treatment costs, which is the cost for Encina disposal and the Metal Arc plant. And we exclude those costs from this analysis because Encina is not a controllable cost for us. We basically get bills from them. We own a percentage and we just pay those costs. So that variance isn't something that we can, they give us their budget, we incorporate it into ours. So it's not a variance that we're sort of responsible for or can change. And then the plant also, most of those costs were reimbursed through reclaimed water sales. So, and a lot of that's chemical costs and other variable costs that are harder to determine and budget for. And we actually get them back through reclaimed water sales anyway. So we exclude those and looking at what we actually, how we perform during the year.
Can I ask a quick question? Actually, I have two questions. When you say the general administration was over budget, and I get it that you said there was more sick time and vacation time. When you said there weren't as many projects, or I don't quite understand what you mean by that. Can you explain that? And secondly, what percentage of our for the reclaimed water sales, what percentage of that sort of discounts the output? And I'm not explaining that very well, but I guess I'm wondering how much do we recoup in recycled water sales?
Okay, so I'll take that. The first one with the G&A. The overhead that I was talking about. So when staff charges labor to projects, so if James's crew in engineering is working on a project, they charge their labor time to that project. So it doesn't hit operating expenses. Their labor will actually go to the project. And then in addition to that, we have to say, well, that time being charged to the project, it's not to employ those people. There are costs of the building, there are costs for electricity, there are costs for other things that we do at the district that are overhead costs. So, and we've determined that percentage to be about 217% or 2.17 times the labor rate. So we have to remove those costs from G&A, from general and administrative costs, and move them to the cost of the project. So during the year, we budget to have a certain amount of that time from groups charged to projects. And if it goes within that amount of time, then the overhead will be similar, but this year they had less time charged. So G&A was actually reduced by a less amount of overhead. Hopefully I explained that okay. We'll get into overhead a lot more during the process and go into, we actually have one meeting specifically on the overhead rate. So this year there was just less money taken out of the G&A costs because less time was charged to projects.
Thank you.
So then,
if I could add to that real quickly. So the total G&A costs don't really change. It's just a matter of where it's accounted for. Is it in the operating budget or is it in the capital side of things? So it's not like this is new money or actually over the overall budget. It's just where it's accounted for.
Yeah, those costs just get allocated to the cost of the project. So they get moved to the capital costs. So then the other question was on reclaimed water sales. So we collect about $2.6 million in reclaimed water sales per year, and that's for the Metal Arc plant costs, anything that's charged to Fund 250. So not all of this cost is recovered, the $2.8 million here. We actually did collect about $2.6 million in reclaimed water costs for fiscal year 2020 though. So some of the Metal Arc costs it's primary and secondary costs, not all of it's tertiary, which means the production of reclaimed water. We only recover the tertiary portion of it.
Thank you.
So now I'll move on to the budget calendar. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of what we'll be doing internally and as well as get some hopeful tentative meeting dates on your calendars and see if we can make those or if we need to reschedule them. So in February, we update the budget numbers, update the budget with the audited numbers, and then we start working on the 2021 projections. So the projections for this year, because we're in February now, so end of February, we'll be projecting those 8 months to the end of June. So we have to start working on those projections based on what we've got for actual expenses this year so far. So we'll start putting those in. And then at the end of February, we get the department budgets for materials and services, and we'll put them into the budget as well. So this is the first meeting, February 22nd, and we have on here that we'll be talking about the calendar and the budget actual for the last 5 years. So that's February. In March, we get the department budgets, we put them into the operating budget, and then we finish up the current year projections and we start working on personnel and payroll estimates. We also complete the debt service forecasts. And then tentatively on March 22nd, if it fits your calendars, we will schedule a finance committee meeting. And at that meeting, we'll go over all of the department requests for operating for materials and services. And we'll also go over the preliminary payroll estimates and staffing costs. So we can talk about the scheduling of that. It'll be somewhere around the end of March, I'm assuming. So if we can fit that on, I'm sure that General Manager Prum and I will set up those meetings later on. Then in April, we will incorporate the operating budget and then we'll be reviewing that to revise and refine it based on comments from the committee as far as changes or revisions that are necessary. And then tentatively on April 12th, we will have another finance committee meeting. At that meeting, we will invite, and James is actually here today, but James Gumpel and Ed Pedrazi will be at that meeting to go over the capital budget requests. And then April 26th, we've kind of held this as a placeholder. We've been working with Raftelis, our consultants, on the cost of service study, but with COVID and everything that's been happening, it's kind of been put on hold. We've been working on it, but it's been delayed. So we'd like to bring that back to the committee and talk about how we'll bring it back to the board and hopefully finalize the cost of service study this year. So hopefully at the April 26th meeting, we can talk about that. Then in May, we'll start working on the reserve projections. After we've got the capital incorporated, we'll start doing the 5 years of reserve projections as well as the 10-year consolidated projections. And then that'll actually, we'll get the first draft of the proposed budget ready to go, and we'll be revising and refining it. And then on May 3rd, we will bring, it'll be another finance committee meeting tentatively. And at that meeting, we'll talk about the draft proposed budget, and we'll talk about any board requested items that we've incorporated or that they'd like to see in the future. And then on May 19th, we'll have a board workshop with the full board to go over the proposed budget. We may even, we've discussed it in the past, whether we not want to possibly take a board workshop on, earlier in May and have 2 of them rather than 1. I think last year we had 2 workshops because of COVID. So whether we do May 3rd as a workshop and May 19th, that's something we can discuss as well. These are just, again, and it's sort of a plan. So May 19th is set up currently as a board workshop to go over the first review of the proposed budget. And then in June, this should be the end of the budget process if all goes well. We will present the draft proposed budget. And at the June 2nd board meeting, we will be bringing forward the recommended budget for approval by the board. So June 2nd may be the final budget meeting. So that's the calendar for the budget. So the next topic is going to be the capacity fund.
Hey, Wes,
Sure.
Before we move on to the next topic real fast, can you send us those dates that you're proposing?
Yes, sir.
So we can start looking and locking things down, especially in light of kind of the recent confusion. Glenn and I had a conversation earlier about standardizing our meetings on the fourth Monday of every month. But I understand during budget season, there's more than just the one meeting going on. And so at first glance, I think those dates work for me, but it's hard to predict exactly what I'm going to be doing in May. So, between work and family and everything else. So, but I think at least the first couple of them look good.
Yep, absolutely. I'll send an email to to Glenn and he can forward it to the directors.
Yeah, so all of these dates that Wes showed for finance committee meetings, they're all Mondays.
Mhm.
So they weren't all the fourth Monday or anything like that, I don't believe. But we'll send them out to the two committee members. It may be helpful while we're talking about it to figure out a time. And it sounds like 3 o'clock may be better than 4 o'clock if we stick with Monday meetings. Do we have
Yes.
consensus from the two committee members on that?
3 works for me if it works for Director Boyd Hodgson.
That's correct. If we do have them on Mondays, then I have an hour from 3 to 4.
Okay, but only an hour, because there's sometimes when we get into the detail, it may require more than an hour. So should we plan on trying to end the meetings at 4? Is that fair?
That's fair. And my schedule is flexible, so we could even start earlier if that works for President Sanella. I'm able to start earlier.
Okay. So yeah, when we get closer to those meetings, we'll figure out how much content we have. And if we think it'll be longer than an hour, I'll coordinate with both of you, make sure that starting earlier works on that particular meeting date.
Okay, so that concludes the budget calendar. So now we'll just go into a discussion on the capacity fund. So this was the slide that we showed at the presentation. I think it was on October 7th. But we've brought the capacity fund to the board and to the committee on several occasions. And this was the most recent one based on the 2021 budget. And I know the question came up in the board meeting about the San Marcos Interceptor, the fact that it's 71% capacity, and the fact that the deficit actually increased as a result of money being spent on the San Marcos Interceptor. I wanted to show this slide because you can see in 2021, there's a dip. And that dip is a result mainly of the San Marcos Interceptor and the fact that we had planned for it and planned on those expenditures. So nothing has changed in our plan. There's no surprises with the Interceptor or the deficit changing. So really there's not a lot to report. And the question that was brought up, it's a surprise that the question was asked because it's shown here that we had planned for it. But to answer other questions, yes, we knew that it's 71% capacity and it's included in the reserves, planned for at 71% capacity. And the other question is, well, if the fund balance is negative, if you have a negative balance in the capacity fund, how do you pay for the project? That's an excellent question. The fund balance is negative, but the district does not have negative money in its checking account. We have money. So what we do is we use that money to pay for the project. And as mentioned previously in other presentations, that is the deficit, the shortfall itself is part of the paper loan that will be paid off over 10 years and is included in the capacity fee rate structure. So the rate that was calculated for the capacity fees, it's included in there. So all this is with the San Marcos Interceptor expenses is just a temporary increase in that paper loan. And we looked at that in planning our 5-year horizon, and we established our action plan for the shortfall. And part of that action plan is that paper loan will be paid, the capacity reserve will pay interest to the replacement reserve for borrowing that paper loan, for borrowing that money. And the next part of our action plan is that, and here you can see the $5.7 million in projects that are going to drive down the capacity fund that we had planned on. And the majority of that is the San Marcos Interceptor. The next steps in our plan are to look at issuing debt. And we've already begun conversations with our financial advisors. As far as our options, we talked about it during the budget process last year. We're talking to them now about what we've got for existing eligible projects and expenditures to look at issuing this debt. And so this is not something that we just put in there and we didn't plan on doing. It's something we're working on now, and it's a 6-month process to issue debt. But once we get into it, that's the plan, is to issue debt. And again, this is budgeted for last year's budget. As we start going through the budget process this year, these numbers may change as far as the amount of debt being issued and the cost of projects in the next 5 years. We'll be updating those with the budget process. So this debt may be more than $10 million. And the project costs in the next 5 years may be more or less. The plan will change with the upcoming budget, but the plan is still to issue debt in fiscal year 2022. So the next part of the chart shows We do expect project costs of about $4.8 million in 2023. So we would expect another dip depending on the amount of debt that's issued. And then we expect another $35 million in project costs in 24-25. At that time, we'll be looking at a second debt issuance, if necessary, if everything goes as planned and shown here, of about $50 million. That's our shortfall action plan. That should address the shortfall in its entirety. And over the 10 years of the CAP fee study, the shortfall should be eliminated. So to summarize this, and this is the same presentation before, we have total growth projects of 45.6, and the $5 million spent on the San Marcos Interceptor is a portion of this. And the total planned debt issuance is about $60 million over the next 5 years. So we're still performing as planned. We're still following our plan. Nothing has changed. And there's really not much else to report right now on the capacity shortfall or deficit, but we're happy to discuss it and talk about it. I know having a negative balance, it is a complicated, confusing topic, but nothing is really new. And this is what the plan is. So what we really wanted to talk about today was just to bring it to the Finance Committee and say, this is what we are planning to do. Nothing has changed. Everything's going as we planned. But we would like to say is if there's any questions you have, anything you'd like us to address at the next board meeting, we're happy to do that as well. So that's why we wanted to bring it to the committee meeting today.
So I think how I see March 3rd happening is that staff will make a presentation. We'll give a general overview and discussion of capacity versus replacement funds. We'll talk about the status of each of those accounts, and Wes has talked a little bit about it here. We'll talk about the steps that the board has already taken, and then we'll talk about steps that we're considering in addition to it. So, and at that point in time, it'll be up for the board to provide whatever response that they want. And I'm anticipating that there'll be public speakers at the meeting on March 3rd as well. So, but with that, maybe we can hear from the two committee members as to whether that approach for March 3rd seems reasonable.
I'll defer to Director Boyd Hodgson as to if she wants to say anything new. I feel like we've kind of beat this subject to death, over the last couple of years. The members of public who really the member of the public, a former employee of ours is really the only one that's really kind of driving this, these questions, and we've responded ad nauseum, both in public forums and in writing. And so I like your plan, Glenn, but if Director Boyd Hodgson wants to see something different, I'm certainly open to it.
Thank you. So, I appreciate that there has been a lot of discussion around this, and it is complicated and it is confusing. What I would say is that we have an obligation to make sure that this is not complicated and that it is explained in a way that that is transparent and that is factual and does not leave room for any kind of misunderstanding. So, to my mind, I'm not an accountant, and I need to hear this more than once. I need to hear the explanation more than once so that I can understand it. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, having just, had like a day to sort of think about it and think about, not even that, only had like 20 minutes to sort of understand what the purpose of, the meeting, having it here in this meeting, and then, what the plan is for March 3rd. So I think what I will do is I will ask that, that any information that was presented today that is not, that hasn't been presented in the past be forwarded to me. And what I will do is, make a commitment to review that information, and I will try to formulate some questions that I will bring to the board meeting. I'm not interested in trying to have like a gotcha moment. I really feel like it's important for me as a board member to understand this. And, I asked the question of, well, if it looks like we have no money, where does the money come from? And I was glad to hear that doesn't mean that we have no money in the bank account. But that's never been presented to me before. It's never been said, you know, here's actually what our bank account says. Like, how do I know that? How do I know how much money we have? Is it, you know, you can say that we don't have any, you know, that we have money in the bank account. That's fine. But that information has not been presented to me. So I get it that we have people very interested in the public, you know, that are in the public domain about this. I too am interested in this. I would like to get to the bottom of it and understand it better. I know that there are strong opinions on all around this issue. So I am looking for an understanding. I'm looking for transparency. I'm looking for receptivity to my naive questions and my sophisticated questions. And I appreciate your continuing to explain it to me.
And Director Boyd Hodgson, we'll certainly get today's information to you. I also committed to Ms. Martin that we would forward any information presented at today's meeting to her. So we will do that as well.
Okay, thank you. That sounds good.
And that's all we had, President Sanella.
Okay, great. Well, you kept us within our limited time frame. I feel like for a short period of time, we were pretty darn productive. And unless Director Boyd Hodgson has anything else, we'll go ahead and adjourn.
No, I appreciate your your timeliness as well, and we'll keep talking about this important issue.
All right.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. Have a good night.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Good night.